So excited for today's podcast. We've got a couple of ladies that are at the top of their game when it comes to the FDA and all that's going on with all the different cannabinoids and some of the things that make us pull our hair out of our heads. So, we're going to get deep into some of the details on this stuff. So we've got Jessica Wasserman. She's an attorney and government relations expert based in Washington, D.C. She's the founder of the Wasserman law firm, which advises clients on FDA matters, including cannabinoid CBD law and regulations. Currently, she's engaged with the 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization process and whether the FDA cannabis issues will be addressed in the 2018 Farm Bill definition of hemp. I cannot wait to find out about that. We've also got Patty Powers. She's a principal with Bose Public Affairs Group and a lawyer with Bose McKinney & Evans. After graduating from the Washington College of Law at the American University, she began her career as a DC advocate, working in the federal government on behalf of clients to influence the federal government. Her specialties include government, agriculture, energy, and infrastructure, and environment. Uniquely, her family winery has given her experience as a regulated party, which gives her unique insight into dealing with similar issues that face her firm's hemp clients. Currently, her work is focused on the Farm Bill, which we can't wait to hear about. But we got a kind of a broader news recently, not what we wanted to hear. The FDA issued an announcement that they would not allow CBD as a supplement in food. And many in the industry are, of course, disappointed. The FDA held public comment and they held hearings. We were really hoping for a different result. What's your take on that?
Well, I can jump in on that one, and Patty, if you want to add, of course. But I think, the first reaction was extreme frustration on the part of industry because hemp was made legal and everyone was so excited in the 2018 Farm Bill. And folks thought, oh, now we're free to jump in and create these products and create markets, not realizing that FDA had all this complicated, difficult hoops to go through. But that had to do with what people in the industry know of as drug preclusion and the fact that there already was a drug, Epidiolex, that had been approved. So FDA's interpretation of their own regs and laws is that when that happens, it's kind of a race. So Epidiolex got there first and got the grip on this CBD molecule, so it couldn't be in food and supplements. But at the same time, the then Commissioner Gottlieb stood up before Congress and said, we're going to create a regulatory pathway for this. So don't worry. So everybody's like, yay, this is going to work out. And here we are all this time later, 2018 to, I can't even add, whatever, 4 or 5 years. And industry had invested millions of dollars in the studies that FDA indicated they needed, and going through the approval process for supplements and being turned down, even with all the science, suddenly, more recently. And so I think that at a minimum, industry felt like, okay, but why didn't you tell us this 5 years ago before we relied on it so much? And again, took you at your word that if we came up with the drug studies that you would work with us. So that's the bad news. I think calming down a little bit that, FDA did say very clearly, we will continue to work on this. We will work with Congress. And at first everyone was like, yeah, sure. We've heard that before. But they did, Janet Woodcock, who was the former acting commissioner for a long time of FDA, so very, very high level, has been put in charge of this by Commissioner Califf to get something done on it. And I know that she is trying and that she has already met with a couple of, the key members of Congress and is scheduling stakeholder meetings. So, I guess it's possible that they are going to try to create some other sort of, not supplements, not food, but something, more like maybe the tobacco center or something like that. But I could go, I'll stop there. But no matter what, it probably, unless there's litigation or some other forcing event, it probably will be still years more before they come up with this alternative pathway. But in the meantime, there's status quo maintained, so it's not the end of the world.
Could the change at all be related to the change in personnel, the change of presidential administration, and golly, stepping down and so forth? I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of momentum before.
Well, I think really it's that there have been so many concerns and states complaining a lot, and some consumers about the higher levels of THC that they were finding in CBD, or perceived anyway. And so, Oregon has passed one, Vermont kind of, Colorado and Washington are looking at it, these limits on the THC level in CBD. So, and I think Patty can speak to this too, but somebody is stirring up, a lot of negative focus around that issue, which I think, if you start saying, oh my goodness, there's this stuff out there that's not regulated and it has all this THC and kids are going to get it, it stirs people up. So I think it's that more than anything that sort of pushed their hand. But Patty, maybe you want to comment on that whole dynamic.
Sure. But before I go there, I mean, I think one of the great frustrations in the industry, so we represent a DA company along with a sort of vertically integrated coalition called the Midwest Hemp Council that has everyone from farmers and seed folks to shops that sell anything that's hemp derived and legal. And there's just a tremendous amount of frustration with the amount of uncertainty at the federal level, and FDA's continuing sort of throwing their hands up like, well, we just don't know how to figure out how to do this. But in the meanwhile, they are allowing other things that could be considered somewhat similar to go forward. So there's just a lot of frustration, and there's a little bit of concern on, well, them now coming up and saying, well, now we have this new way forward, but like Jessica said, that's going to be another huge delay. So how long can this industry survive? The legally complying part of the industry survive with years and years of continued uncertainty. So there's a big, I think, a lot of concern there, and sort of lack of trust in that FDA is really gonna do the right thing here. So just for that, I lost track of this. So on the DA,
I had a follow-up question anyway. Are there any other governmental agencies involved in this decision besides the FDA, or is it just the FDA making that decision?
Well, it is really FDA and Congress, I would say, on this one, specifically on whether there will be this supplement or food pathway. But the only other thing that we should mention here is that at the same time that FDA said no supplement or food pathway, they also denied 3 citizens petitions, which are citizens petitions sound fancy, but it's just a way of suing FDA to do something. And so basically they said those petitions were saying all the same things, that FDA needed to get going, and made all kinds of legal arguments about why they needed to create this pathway. And so it's likely that somebody will appeal, one of the litigants there will appeal, and it does force FDA to do something within about an 8-month time frame. So that's the only kind of hope for, I think, a quicker time frame, is if those lawsuits went forward as kind of just to leverage on Congress and FDA to get a move on, because there was a very, very similar case with a molecule called NAC that went through the same process, citizens petitions and all that, and appeal, and then FDA did concede, but they still haven't really fixed it, but they've at least said, yes, NAC is not subject to this drug preclusion thing, and you can go ahead with enforcement discretion and lightening up on it. And so it's possible that could happen and kind of move the timeline along. So more than another agency, it would be that, like litigation, FDA, Congress are kind of the triangle, I think, on this at the moment.
Can you elaborate on what those petitions were?
So, FDA law and regulation is just like notoriously complicated, and oh my goodness, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But fundamentally, there's the idea that for anything, it's a very strong FDA concept. If something's been on the market for a really long time, it's kind of presumed safe, because in a way, all of that consumption broadly is kind of like a clinical study. People, you can see there haven't been adverse effects or whatever. So, and in the law, if something has been on the market before DSHEA was enacted, which is 1994, I think. So that's one of the arguments, is that hemp was on the market before, and so therefore it isn't subject to drug preclusion and all of this. And then all kinds of just general administrative law arguments around arbitrary and capricious, and kind of the things we're talking about, that they could another kind of legal wrinkle is that even though in this drug preclusion area, the thing that I described about how the drug side, Epidiolex, got a lock on this molecule before the food and supplement side did, there is a regulation that allows FDA to override that without even going back to Congress. And so that's argued in the petitions too, that they should have exercised that and did not. That legally it doesn't matter, but just for your information, FDA has not used that to override much of anything ever. So, and people argue that's because they're biased toward the pharmaceutical side, because the argument there is that the whole reason for that drug preclusion idea is that, why would any pharmaceutical company invest in research dollars to develop a pharmaceutical if they know that a food can be more generally available without prescription or whatever in a food or supplement. But that's kind of, anyway, I'm not choosing sides, but that is the way it's discussed a lot. And what people on the supplement side, or even just common sense, you'd say, oh yeah, well, Epidiolex, yes, it's a drug, but in terms of CBD, it's at an extremely high level, like multiples of 10, 100 to what is the level that you see CBD in a CBD product. So why can't they both exist, in different swim lanes? And that was what was expected, back when I said back in 2018, when Gottlieb stood up before Congress and said, yes, we can develop this regulatory pathway. We thought that there would be some line drawing about serving size level, in the two pharmaceutical Epidiolex versus the wellness products. But so that's kind of where we're at with all of that at the moment.
Is there another example of that where something is a drug at a high concentration, but not at something low over the counter?
Surprisingly little, and that I think sort of helps FDA's side. It doesn't seem as if that line drawing is something they've done a lot in the past. It doesn't mean they couldn't, but I think that's part of, if you want to see it from their perspective, is that I think they feel as if they almost want Congress or somebody to tell them what to do. I think they almost maybe want to be sued on these citizens. Honestly, because I think it's such a new area. They're like, we don't want to know how to break new ground here. We don't want to make enemies even, or, this isn't really a science issue. I think they feel that Congress should be telling them how to handle this new product. And, something, again, what's so unique about it is it's already out there. It's to such an extent that in a way it's kind of ridiculous for FDA to say, well, we don't have the safety data to regulate this, but if it's really so unsafe, you're just leaving all this out there, it's kind of doesn't make sense, so clearly they know it's not highly dangerous or anything, or they wouldn't do anything about it.
So what would it take from Congress to achieve what we're hoping, or what the FDA is asking?
Well, Patty's the congressional expert.
Patty, then.
So there are a number of bills. There's so much. There was a lot of legislation that was introduced by the end of the last Congress, so that's out there. Not all of it has been reintroduced, but we expect to see a lot of it back. And there were some sort of smaller, very specific bills that directed FDA to I don't, Jessica, what's the right term? It's not licensed, but to allow FDA to allow everything that the 2018 Farm Bill made legal to be designated as a food. There's one does food and one does supplement in these two House bills. There's another bill in the Senate that would do the same. And then these kinds of things are incorporated in some of the broader based legislation as well. But some of it is like the big Senate bill, the CAOA.
Don't ask me what it stands for though, because I can never remember. Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act.
Yes,
Of course, we're going to
I call it the Dream On Act, but
right. But what's interesting about that is everything in that bill is based on the legalization of marijuana. So there was a little bit of a kerfluffle when that came out early last fall, because they had a lot of stuff in there about hemp that was concerning to us. And when we asked about it, they're like, oh, no, we don't mean that piece of it to stand on its own. That only works once everything is made legal, and then we want to be thinking about these substances in this way.
And that bill addressed too much, like everything. That's why I call it the Dream On.
Yeah.
I love the Mace bill. What about what that one had?
Well, that one, it's interesting. That one is really good on our topic.
I love that one.
I mean, when I was mentioning if something's been in use for a long time, it should just be grandfathered in and say it's safe and just let it go, which is probably what should be done with this. And I think that's what FDA thinks should be done with it, except for on the margins where, you would want to have a lot of warnings about pregnancy and drug interaction and kids and stuff. But other than that, I think FDA even thinks it's fine, So the Mace bill just takes that concept and it doesn't even argue. It just says it's been on the market long enough, basically. It's fine. But the other thing the Mace bill does is also kind of incorporate the states into it more, which you would expect from the Republican side, a little more federalism. And that's another idea I've been hearing lately when you say about solutions, like what could the next step, if FDA is saying they're going to work with Congress to do something, what is that something? Because the bills that Patty was talking about basically would get rid of that preclusion thing, that Epidiolex problem, but it would still mean that you'd have to prove safety on the product, and whether or not FDA would, eventually they'd give on that probably after a lot more studies, but it would still be a lot of expense for the industry and uncertainty and so forth. So anyway, another kind of idea that I just heard this, so I'm not sure whether it really works, but some kind of concept that that the federal law would say something like, whatever the states are saying about CBD is fine. And if you're meeting the state, we'll leave you alone. But, and that's a little bit, the Mace has that concept in it for, or the old states bills or whatever. I'm not sure if that works, because the states laws, then you would have so much confusion around them. And a lot of them say whatever FDA says, we agree with, incorporate into their law. So it would be a weird circle. I don't know.
Yeah, I think from a business point of view, that's challenging if you're doing business outside of the state. So it would be better than no on everything, but it's probably in the long run makes a lot more sense to have some sort of federal threshold, and then allow the states, if they want to be stricter or not, to do that within parameters, so they know where they're going. But I think it's so the Mace bill has not been reintroduced. She's still very active on the issue, so I expect that it will be. I think that there's an active cannabis caucus, in the bipartisan caucus in the House. And I think it's going to be important to try to keep moving things along there. But there's between Mace and then David Joyce from Ohio, and Brian Mast from Florida, pretty strong Republican support for trying to fix this problem, and recognizing. And the other thing, we like to talk to people on the Hill when we're talking about we need to fix this uncertainty and allow these products to move forward, is, the fear-based, oh, we shouldn't do anything because we don't understand everything about these products, puts at risk really what, we interpret the 2018 Farm Bill as doing. As what it did was, we're legalizing this, go forth and find out what this plant can do for our society. And, to sort of arbitrarily, because there isn't research that backs a lot of these claims, to say, well, we can do hempcrete, but we can't do, something that allows people to control their anxiety, or in some cases that they claim their pain, without a dangerous kind of drug like an opioid. So, in shutting it down and shutting down what the 2018 Farm Bill created, what do we risk losing? What we don't know yet. We know there's 140, maybe more cannabinoids in a hemp plant, and we understand very few of them. But there's great potential there. So there's an undefined cost, and probably very hard to define cost of cutting this off without understanding what we're dealing with.
And also, it's being a farm bill. The point of it was to help farmers, and so
Right.
to have them, again, it's the reliance. They invested the way the CBD industry, processing industry did it too, also in acreage and buying, seeds and getting involved with this plant with all sorts of expectation that FDA's delay has already harmed them and will continue to. But another thing, you mentioned, everyone wonders why FDA is holding it to quite such a high standard. I mean, they are holding CBD to a different standard, and I guess I always wonder if it's because they're thinking about precedent for the entire cannabis, marijuana side of things, but they never, normally for supplements, you don't have to show cumulative impact. Like if you would go in and say, if you have to prove that your product is safe, you don't have to prove that that you're going to analyze where it might get to a consumer anywhere, not just your product, but it might be in this or that or the other. Nothing is held, nothing to that standard, or to a standard of such a long time. Like they'll say, yes, we accept that these studies there is no immediate harm, but we don't know about chronic long-term use, It's like, what? Nobody, no other supplement ever do they ask that kind of thing. So there's some fear about it. I think either, I don't know whether it's because it is, the intoxicating aura, or they're afraid that if they make some determination about how they're going to handle this, that it is an implication for other things they haven't thought about, or what the heck. But they are strangely reluctant to move forward, or to accept the safety so far. On the other hand, I talk to this FDA at a pretty high level all the time, and they say different things on different days, but it seems like some days it seems like they're saying, well, yes, we admit it's pretty safe, we just need a little more research on the edges, and then a lot of labeling, like to say don't use longer than 90 days, don't let kids get it, don't. And I'm always like, yes, that's the right direction, just do it.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
That's where I get back to, I think if they could get Congress to tell them to do that, they would actually be all right with it. So as informed, educators and stuff, I think that's what we should keep repeating is, come on, it's out there, it's been used a lot, there haven't been, any, horrible results, knock on wood or whatever, but the product in essence is safe. We're so sure, and we need all the good manufacturing processes, and it's the fact that it's not regulated in that way that's caused some of these risks. And then, yes, if there is some risk on certain vulnerable populations, we'll label as we do for all things for it, and
Right, yeah.
be done with it.
Didn't the World Health Organization conclude a few years ago that CBD had a good safety profile, and
Yeah, they said it's absolutely not addictive, I remember.
Yeah.
And yes, and that it has a good safety profile, and yes, it was very positive. And
Yeah, with the exception of, perhaps a few esoteric drug interactions that,
Yeah.
all in all.
Yeah, no, it was very positive. That they didn't, I think what's happened a little bit since then, again, I don't want to point fingers, but this concern about the THC levels, WHO didn't address, but FDA, I'm nervous about saying FDA should address that, but they could, just say, put some upper limit on that, on the THC level in the CBD. But I don't think they even need to at all, to be honest, because again, there's been this, I think it's that there's like just commercial competition between marijuana and hemp that's created some of the public relations kind of sense that CBD is not safe when it has THC in it. Because of course, understandably, the marijuana side feels like, oh my goodness, we're regulated so highly in these dispensaries and this competitor thing is out there being sold at the drugstore or whatever. So that's not fair. Which I get, but it seems like it's really not that much, compared to the illegal market for marijuana. It's just like not competition at all. And it's at such a different level of, what's mostly purchased in the dispensaries, marijuana dispensaries, is so much more. I mean, the most you can really get out of the CBD that's legal is, 3 milligrams or something of THC per serving, which doesn't seem like it should have to be in a dispensary.
Yeah, not that much. And, I mean, it's supposed to be under 0.3 by dry weight.
Right.
Which brings us to the Farm Bill. I mean, let's talk about, do you think that the definition of hemp would be changed as it was in the 2018 Farm Bill?
I can start with that, Jessica. So I mean that's sort of our main focus on the Hill for this year. And our messaging on that is there, there's no analysis that shows justification to change it beyond maybe some of the competition issues that Jessica just raised. That farmers and other players in the industry have invested heavily in bringing hemp back onto the market. And you just need to give it more time. In the absence of something harmful, why would you change it? Or in the absence of any research showing that that was the incorrect number, why would you change it? One of the issues that's raised often, and fortunately has been addressed by USDA, is the issue of a hot crop, a hot hemp crop. So initially, farmers were evaluated on their level of THC in their plants with they would just take a snip of it and measure it. And if it came up above 0.3% THC by Delta 9 THC by dry weight, they pretty much condemned the whole crop, said you have to destroy your crop. So they would have to then burn, or I guess they mostly burned it, which was my husband might chuckle at this, but as a farmer, I mean, that's like the most horrifying thing. You work
Yeah.
the whole, and you just end up burning it. And it turned out it was not a very accurate measurement of the way to take it. So USDA changed their rules and increased the mitigation approaches. So if you test hot, they allow you to go back in and process the actual plant. So you test the level of Delta 9 THC in the whole plant, not just in that one snip. And what we hear is then farmers find there's no problem because a hemp plant doesn't have more than that. So that they're not losing their crops. So that on that side of it, I think, which is really the only valid real concern there. It's really not a concern anymore because USDA has addressed it. I didn't
know it made that much of a difference in the testing if they're able to use the whole plant.
Yeah, sure, because most of the THC would be in the flower and the leaves of the flower. Yeah. So so that made a big difference. So
THC, sorry.
The other issue is just how its impact, how hemp farmers have been impacted through the markets since 2018. And there's a lot of excitement initially. There was a lot of acres planted without market identified necessarily for the results of those, the amount of planting. And it very quickly crashed when they couldn't sell it. No one was buying enough of it. And what we hear from our Midwest Hemp Council members is that the CBD oil market basically allowed them to stay in business because they were able to sell that and then use that, and then the market, the farm market had to shrink a little bit to reflect what was really being bought. But the having CBD oil as a product, finished product from the plant, really has allowed them to stay in business, and will allow the hemp market into other areas like infrastructure and fiber and food to grow over time. It wasn't going to happen overnight. So, there's a lot of support at least in our association's farmer members for not changing anything in the definition and having an impact on the businesses that they're trying to build.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that they might change some of the rules to create separate rules for industrial? If it's not going to be, human consumption, all the testing and all of the expense of all that doesn't seem to be so relevant.
Yeah, and there's as far as I understand it, the testing that's required now is pretty onerous. I mean, you have to have your farm workers run through FBI fingerprinting to make sure that they don't have a record. There is this testing requirement. Not enough labs are doing this testing, so it really does make it very hard. And there is some legislation on the Hill that considers fixing some of those onerous requirements to make it more reasonable.
There's one to just simply exempt anything that's not consumed by humans, pretty much. Like if you can show and you can track that it's going just to non-consumption uses. But it hasn't been introduced, but that's been discussed. But that's kind of interesting because there's another group that there's something called performance standards, which is that at the state level allows this kind of exemption. And some in the industry seem to prefer that. Like they wanted to stick with the state situation again. And that's another point about the rules that you're talking about, Patty. They're different in every state. I mean, there's the way the Farm Bill was drafted, it's such a weirdo that in terms of regulating the harvest side, you propose this plan with certain baseline requirements that the USDA is in the legislation and regulations. But beyond that, the states can kind of do it their way. So some states are much stricter than others about all this stuff. And, some farmers, but I think they, the point, it's gotten better, but I think they still feel like they're in kind of a straitjacket and would welcome some change. But I think the important thing for those on the cannabinoid side is to say, well, yeah, okay, from our perspective, probably just leave it alone is the best solution. But if it does change, only change it on the harvest side, which like some of the bills out there in the Pingree bill, for example, which is problematic in a lot of ways, does make that distinction, like keeps 0.3 for cannabinoid and goes to 1% for the harvest side. And I can see how that might crop up again, no pun intended.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and go ahead.
I was going to say there's a lot of confusion on the Hill about what those standards are and what they mean. So people are throwing around like and is it a milligram or is it a percent of dry weight, or like what are you measuring? Are you measuring all of the THC or are you measuring just delta 9 THC? And honestly, I mean, people have no idea.
I know. so much. Outside of our little hemp bubble, people don't have the.
Yeah. So I think I mean, we are taking the very, very strong position that it should just be left alone.
I think I agree.
And, at some point in the future, when we better understand all of this, I mean, maybe it makes more sense when you look at what are you producing, and you regulate back from that. But for right now to change it, it's just, I mean, these farmers have had a really, really difficult time, and I always think about this as this is like the repeal of prohibition and trying to stand back up again, and it's just a lot of challenges, and I think, you know, for a lot of people in farming is just so hard. You know, they saw this as you know, an alternative to, you know, the 300-acre dairy farm where they're going to do a piece of it like this and maybe, you know, give themselves a little buffer against markets and, you know, other kinds of farm markets. And, you know, we just need to let that play out.
Yeah, we could do a better job, you know, and I just kind of bring this up about, you know, all of the testing that's required is all on the premise of we're trying to make sure you're not growing marijuana.
Right.
But if it's just going to go into hempcrete, you know, who cares? So in Texas, for example, and you know, a lot of states, not just Texas, we, you know, follow what the feds say, or our hemp statute, for example, references the federal, you know, so our hands are tied on some things, because when they first drafted that law, they didn't realize that that would kind of hang them up and prevent them from some more state-based leniency. So here, for example, you know, the farmer's got to do, you know, that testing 2 weeks before, and then another test. And every time he does a test, he has to pay to send it off. He has to pay for a transport manifest, and he has to do that for each variety that he's growing separately. So it makes it really hard on the farmer. And then if it comes back a little too hot, well, then as we said at the beginning, you know, they're faced with burning it all. And luckily we now have a little bit more leeway on that. But anyway, I hope to see something like that in the future too. And it would be great if this just gets to be treated as an agricultural commodity at some point, instead of, oh my gosh, this is almost marijuana. So I think part of the problem. And speaking about almost marijuana, you think Delta 8 will be impacted by the FDA or the Farm Bill?
So I mean, it's you know, we're working on behalf of Delta 8 not being impacted by the Farm Bill for sure. You know, one thing that that some folks have been saying on the Hill is that it was never the intention of the 28 Farm Bill to allow Delta 8 to be produced. And that's just not true. I mean, I don't think anyone, I mean, one reason for it, I mean, we looked and we couldn't find it. Number one, which is, you know,
They hardly knew what Delta 9 was. How would they know what Delta 8 was? I don't think they could have.
Right. They still don't really understand it.
I didn't know.
But
I didn't know about it at that time.
Yeah.
You know, so there was nothing that was discussed about limiting what could be done with a hemp plant in allowing hemp to be grown again. And in a way, it's you know, it's one of the things our client likes to say is it's you know, it's sort of the American way. Like you come up with new stuff and you do, you know, you exercise your rights to do all of that. So you know, I think that our very strong position is that we don't change the definition, keep it the same, allow the industry to go forward. We are happy to work with the FDA. You know, our clients work hard on trying to come up with labeling that's fair. I mean, they support only sales of DA products to over 21. Their current labels not required, but what they do is they recommend it not be used by pregnant women, and of course not by children, and label it as over 21. They're not you know, they're not advertising in something to attract children, and they're also very interested in the testing of the products. So as these new products come online, you need to keep developing new testing methodologies that give you an accurate read of what's actually in the product so that the consumer is buying. So they're also very supportive of number one, the industry making requirements on themselves. But if that doesn't happen, and you know, the feds feel the need to do that, they're very interested in working with the FDA to you know, to use some of the testing that they've developed and have the products clearly labeled so consumers know exactly what they're buying.
You know, another point that we haven't raised that occurred to me about Delta 8 is to remember that not all states have legalization. So in those states, the dynamic is kind of different.
Not to speak to that, you know, Texas, for example, while I hear you that about capitalism and there wasn't an express intent to keep from being, you know, intoxicating cannabinoids discovered in Texas, for example, you know, I was working on getting the hemp law passed, and that was a lot of hard work. It took a lot of education. Every single senator, representative I would talk to would say, hemp, ain't that just your stepping stone to marijuana? Or what's to prevent Billy Bob from planting a hemp patch or a marijuana patch in his hemp fields? You know, I got that all the time. There was a whole lot of resistance because there was this idea that this is marijuana junior, you're just trying to get the camel's nose under the tent. So there were a lot of assurances, even from our Texas Ag Commissioner to the legislators, saying this is not to get high on, this is not that, you know, what they would say is rope, not dope. And in order to get it passed at the end, you know, on the Senate floor, almost across the finish line, you know, someone stood up and said, promise me this is not going to be smoked. You know, this is not to get high off of. And they said, we promise. And so we have a ban on smokable hemp and some other things. So, of course, I can't speak to negotiations in DC, but that's how it was in Texas. And so now, you know, we're dealing with a lot of blowback from that, you know, and a lot of irritation that, hey, you promised us this, and look at this debacle now. And now we're dealing with Delta 8 and all these other weird cannabinoids and the Delta 9, and it's all over, you know, and so it's kind of
turning into a debacle. There really isn't a debacle, right?
It's a debacle here because we don't have a marijuana industry. So to our guys, if you're getting high off something, that was not intended, and they don't want that to be allowed. So we're in our legislative session right now, which we're in every odd year. And so we're trying to get some improvements to the hemp law, and we're kind of stymied because there's also, you know, new efforts to try to ban Delta 8 and the like, you know. And so this is now something that we're up against because, like I said, it's like it's the blowback from, hey, we legalize this, and it turns out everybody's trying to get high off of it, and now all the parents are upset that their kids can buy Delta 8 and whatever vapes at the gas stations and so forth. So I don't know. I'm not saying I agree with all that. I'm just saying that's
because FDA is not regulating it enough. Because
well, yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, the CBD that's legal, the CBD that complies with the Farm Bill isn't getting people high much. And D8, I don't think it's getting people that high.
No, I know, but I mean, through the Farm Bill or through a hemp law is how we've gotten all of these other things on the market, you know, and some of them are dangerous and some of them are being unscrupulously produced. And those are the kind of things that our legislators focus on. And, you know, it didn't help when the FDA and the CDC put out those warnings. I mean, it just didn't help the cause in the more conservative states on the whole hemp thing and trying to broaden the hemp, you know, so anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, sort of to Jessica's point though about FDA's role, but you know, even to the extent of if they were all required to be appropriate, you know, accurately labeled for what they contained. And there's a testing methodology that's commonly used that and I don't understand the chemistry part of it, but when the test is done, it will tell you how much Delta 8 is in it, but it doesn't tell you accurately how much Delta 9 is in it. So it's, you know, it will look like it passes, but it's, if you run it another way, then it doesn't. So, I mean, there's a way to address all of those kinds of issues. And
oh yeah, I mean, we've got lab shopping real bad. So. I mean, in Texas we do. I'm assuming that it's that way in other places too. I know it's that way in Colorado too.
Yeah, exactly. So if you know, the way you would fix that is you develop a test that's accurate. And we have one of those tests, and you know, we're happy to share it, and would prefer that the industry adopt that test on its own. But not everyone in the industry wants to do that.
Yeah, well, it's capitalism again. You know, these labs can get away with, you know, and then they get known for, I'm not going to fail you on this, or I'm going to highlight this cannabinoid, or I don't know. I just see all kinds of things. And then, you know, there's these poor retailers that maybe they're just a retail. Maybe they don't, they're not a CBD boutique. Maybe it's a head shop or something like that. And they don't even know what a COA is, let alone how to read it or how to tell if it's, the product is actually too hot or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely need standardization. It just kind of goes back to the beginning of how frustrating it is that FDA is kind of hunting it here. So
But another part of this too is, you know, what we talked about earlier is this is all out there now. And I was looking at something last week, and Nancy Mace I have a quote from her that says the genie is not going to go back in the bottle, and she was talking about marijuana, but I think it applies as well to all of these products.
absolutely.
You know, people use them. They have, you know, they use them for wellness. They use them for whatever reasons they use them for. They're not going to stop using them. So if you put some players out of business, you're just going to send it underground. And, you know, you'll just expand the illegal market, which that's your craziest idea yet. So it's, and actually that's when we've mentioned that in congressional offices, that has definitely paused the discussion a little bit when, you know, folks kind of process what that looks like. You know, if you just sort of wave your congressional magic wand and say, well, yeah, people thought this was okay, but now we're saying it's not going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's such a controversy here in Texas because we've got the lawmakers want to clamp down and outlaw what they see as like, oh, we didn't expect this to happen. And then you've got, you know, we've got a sizable veterans population and all kinds of others that have, you know, they use the term rely. They have come to rely on Delta 8 to help them sleep or this or that, you know, particularly because such a limited medical marijuana program that this is the alternative, is to be able to go up the street and buy, you know, one of these cannabinoid products for whatever it is to help you. So yeah, it's going to be hard to put that back in the bottle too. You know, even in Texas, for example, let's say that they're successful. I don't think they will be, but they'll try. We're a huge state, and our health department already has a lot of things on its hands besides policing hemp companies. You know, I can't imagine being able to put all that back in the bottle. And even if they hit all of the CBD boutiques, they're not going to do anything to the gas stations.
We need to legalize marijuana. It's obvious.
Oh yeah, well, of course we're working on that too. I am hopeful that we will get at least a viable program in Texas this session with chronic pain and upping our THC percentage. And of course, that's what we, you know, when we're lobbying for marijuana on that side, we try to explain, hey, you don't like all these delta isomers that people are using? Well, let's broaden our medical program so that people can take something that's tested and that's in the system. And that's what people would prefer to do. You know, veterans don't like to be a criminal in getting weed illegally or buying stuff that's kind of sketchy. I think that most everybody would rather get something in a legal regulated system that's been tested and has some kind of reliable efficacy. So yeah, we're all on the same page. If we could just get all of the people in charge on the same page, that would be great. Well, how about, you know, we're talking about these different cannabinoids and some different, you know, controversies. And the DEA just spoke up on THCO. So what do y'all think about that?
Well, I think it doesn't have that many implications really, because, well, it's pretty narrow. People kind of have misinterpreted it. So all that DEA is saying is that for something that doesn't appear as a molecule at all in the cannabis plant, that is not included under the hemp definition, or, that is still a controlled substance. And that makes sense to me. I mean, but it doesn't affect D8 or D9 or D10 or
Oh, right,
DG,
exactly.
or it's like, I didn't really understand until this decision that how different THCO was. That's just a very different, I don't know which the so-called, I mean, I wouldn't even call that a cannabinoid. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's just a invented thing.
Yeah. So I'm not, it makes sense to me, but it doesn't change much for what's out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's in line with how I read the 2020 interim final rule too. I never thought that that applied to Delta 8. I thought that it applied to a completely synthetic.
Mhm.
But there's been a lot of misleading headlines because I've had so many people send me these articles, and I guess it's the way that it's worded, because it'll say Delta 8 and Delta 9 derived THCO. And so the question's always, what happened to Delta 8? Like, nothing. Like, it's just a misleading headline.
Yeah, I think it's the word synthetic, like anything, they just think that whatever synthetic means, whatever they think it means, that decision somehow impacted anything that.
Yeah, we're seeing
there's
if we
no
can kind of
definition.
bifurcate that a little bit in Texas, because right now they just want to do this sweeping, all synthetic things are illegal. But the way that it's worded, it would make CBD, CBDN, it would make them all illegal.
Yeah,
So we're
it's
trying to
very
make a
hard to define
distinction.
synthetic. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
know.
impossible,
We're
to
just
be
trying to
honest.
make a distinction between biosynthetic, like if it actually came from the plant, then come on, that should not be considered synthetic, under the same,
Mhm.
reasoning. So we'll see where that shakes out. What's the interagency look at cannabis scheduling? How's that impact cannabinoid regulation? And I also kind of wanted to touch on a little bit if this is reflected at all in when President Biden asked for there to be a reevaluation of the marijuana scheduling. How do some of these different federal agencies all come into play, and how they're all involved in such a thing?
Well, I think that's like
It's not just a magic wand by one agency, right?
Well, I think it's very long-term, unfortunately, like it's a good thing. We shouldn't deny that, because it's coming from the White House, which means that it's the agencies will have to step up. And it isn't just FDA, it's like a whole bunch of agencies, but they are, as you might imagine, sort of competing for who's really in charge. And FDA will say, yeah, but it's us that determines, rules on the 8-factor test, which is all this, stuff. And it is true, they probably are still the main agency, but DEA is still critical there, and Homeland Security and some of the more political issues around marijuana, those players would be there. And since it is kind of a Biden thing from the Biden White House, would it just, if there's a different president in 2 years, whether it would survive. But so I think from marijuana advocacy standpoint, it's really good, because it's so crazy the way it's defined right now, which is, as everybody knows, in the scheduling, marijuana is in the schedule where it says marijuana has absolutely no benefit. So it's like scheduled with heroin and stuff, which is silly, and everybody knows it's silly. And it does, there's just so much science, now that hasn't been taken into account in that scheduling. But it just won't have any quick result, and it would more likely be a rescheduling than a descheduling. So like just making it a little less highly risky category, but that would help quite a lot in some instances. But it's like the devil's in the details and all of it. And again, I think unfortunately it's something that's good for the very long term if they keep at it. But I don't like seeing FDA, I think, is using as a little bit of an excuse now to say, oh well, and like for CBD, until we get this scheduling thing all worked out, maybe we don't want to create a regulatory pathway. That kind of creates another excuse for them, unfortunately, in that context that we're talking about immediately today. But it's still, I mean, we should just welcome it. I mean, it was a very positive thing, just not very quickly to expect a result from it.
I mean, do they think they could get it done within this presidential term? Is that possible?
Probably not, because FDA will make it so difficult with all the science, and what they're kind of holding out for now, my guess is budget funding to stand up a cannabis center from Congress. So they're going to say, you know, with this descheduling effort and CBD and everything, we need a bunch of money to have a center like we have the tobacco center.
Oh, okay.
And they're looking really long term. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. It is, you know, it's a big deal and it needs to be done right. And there is, all the scheduling affects our international obligations, which gets really complicated and tricky. You know, like Canada just legalized federally, but they did that. They're really, you know, arguably not in compliance with their treaty obligations anymore, in these UN treaty obligations. But anyway, there's so many, you know, that's the, like, state will be part of this interagency. Unless some politician came in and just thought, man, I'm going to win a whole election based on just, you know, like legalizing. I mean, that's what got the only reason Biden did that sentencing reprieve at the last minute there, right before the election. So I don't know.
Conspicuously timed, we'll just say that.
So many factors, but it's so important that at the grassroots we all keep just pushing and pushing on the state. You know, eventually, as everyone knows, it's all going to shake out, but eventually could be, you know, we just hope it would be like 1, 2, 3 years, not 10, 20, 30 years. So
What do you think, Patty?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, the polling, and I haven't looked at it in every state, but in, you know, like a conservative state like Indiana is, you know, pretty steady, like 70% for legalization.
Wow.
And you know, it's really surprising. I mean, you'd expect it, like Maryland, you'd expect it. But you know, it's pretty much across the country. So it's one of those times where you see, you know, public perception or public opinion just kind of tugging really hard, and the government, especially the federal government, just going really, really slow. So, and I, you know, some of those polls will sort of break it down very specifically into, you know, is it medical use versus not, and you know, and again, back into all of these issues like over 21, or, you know, or how it's labeled, how it's tested. You know, I just think that there's ways to address people's concerns for these products in a responsible way without shutting down the industry. You know, it's either we have, you know, we have the Wild West, or we kill it. Should not be the choice.
Oh, I agree. Well, like in Texas, though, you break that down, you know, of course, we've got high percentages of approval. Texans like to smoke weed, but when you break it down, you know, it'll be like 95% of Democrats, of course, but then Republicans will only be like 51%. You know, and then since the Republicans are in charge of everything in Texas, you're really kind of only looking like at a 50-50 thing. So I don't know. I feel like I got to point that out to people sometimes in a state like Texas, that while that high polling sounds great, you know, we need the Republicans to all get on board with that too. But they are coming, and that's one reason why I like the Mace bill, is that it's put forth by a Republican. So I mean, I know she's a young Republican, but hopefully she could have some success in getting some people around her just by virtue of that. And I like that her bill is just so very common sense. And you know, not a whole lot of regulation, putting things kind of with the agency they should be at, allowing trading, you know, not a bunch of taxes, and you know, all that kind of thing. So I would like to see that, or something like that, make it through, something that everybody could get behind on both a health standpoint but also a business standpoint, because some of the legalization things would just be disastrous for business. I mean, you've got to kind of have, you got to have both for the whole thing to function. So.
Right. Yeah, so I'm not going to make a claim that Indiana is as conservative as Texas. That can be a whole
We're pretty conservative.
pretty conservative state. And I think the last polling number was like 69% overall. So it's and there's a lot of Republican supporters for what's going on there in, in expanding not full legalization of marijuana, but opening it up.
Yeah,
one of the issues that has some traction is the discussion of and so you kind of started touching on veterans' use of cannabinoid products. There have been some studies. There is one that we quote often out of the University of Michigan that compared. Yeah, I know.
It's my alma mater.
Compare the use of opioids and cannabinoids, and the idea that some of these products could lessen the desire for people to go down the opioid path is very interesting to a lot of folks.
Yeah, that's our messaging this session in Texas too, is the opioid, not just people getting addicted to opioids, but also because we're also very sensitive to all the stuff that's coming over the border, because right here we know about it. It's the fentanyl that's getting into everything too. And even the marijuana. So I mean, I've heard DEA and our own DPS talks about marijuana being sprayed. And then another thing I just learned recently was that and all these folks they're sending across the border with, let's say they've got a big bale of marijuana or what have you, bricks of it. They are in the middle of it is all the fentanyl, because before they would just, it's a big thing of marijuana, just throw it over there or whatever. And they weren't like burrowing into it to test to see what was on the inside. So like that's a new thing. And then, there's been studies around for years. I mean, I think I remember doing some research in 2016. It was that Medicare study that showed that in states that had legalized, there were fewer opioid prescriptions and fewer fatalities. And now, we've got so much more studies on that, and really hoping that, our veteran population in Texas can really start to lead that charge. And they're also kind of propelling the psychedelics for mental health. So, I'm glad that we are starting to have some progress across the country, even in conservative states. And that's interesting, and it's kind of a topic for another podcast, but, with the stigma of cannabis, and we're still kind of down here, as far as research and acceptability, but yet psychedelics is kind of leapfrogged over. It doesn't seem to have as much stigma. It seems like to me that it's more mainstream and the people willing to talk about it and approve of it compared to cannabis. In Texas, for example, we got a psychedelics research bill on the first try. It was pushed through by former Governor Perry. I started working on cannabis in 2015. There were advocates working on it before me, and 2015 was when we finally got our law passed. And here we are, 2023, and we're still trying to get chronic pain as a condition, So that's just kind of interesting. And it just speaks to what you were saying, Patty, about the veterans and, these certain populations really exposing some of this dark underbelly that's out there. And if we could get some enlightenment on these cannabinoids and, and some of these things, and get some more of these alternatives that are natural legalized, that's just going to help everybody's mental health. So
you should know there was a bipartisan bills introduced at the beginning of this session by, I think it was Senator Tester from Montana, who's a Democrat, and Senator Sullivan from Alaska, who's a Republican, I think it was a VA medical research bill on the use of cannabis. So I think that will help all of these things too, is you get the research out there, and then you'll be able to just dispute all of the stuff people make up all the time for whatever set of other reasons they have.
Yeah. Well, let's hope. I filed an amicus in the lawsuit against the DEA on behalf of Dr. Sue Sicily, and that was to research cannabis for veterans and PTSD, specifically. And that was so hard. I mean, what was work on that, like 5 years, just to finally get a research license there. So I hope that, like you're saying, that these initiatives are going to come through with a lot more bipartisan support, and with a lot of these other valuable population demographics supporting the need for alternatives to opioids, and the need to anything we can do to keep people away from these accidental fentanyl overdoses. It's so scary.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Well, I don't want to end on a bad note, though. Let's talk. Let's end on a more positive note. Do y'all have any predictions? Anything that y'all would like to talk about that you think things are heading on the right track, or some things to look forward to in the next year, or maybe the next Farm Bill?
Well, despite all that we're saying, FDA is not taking the stuff off the market, nor is DEA. They're all just kind of hanging around. Letting arguably letting the states kind of do their thing. As long as they don't step in and make matters worse, that's always a problem. We can chug along until the stars line up a little bit better, but again, as we all know, it's gonna, in the long term, there's gonna be full legalization, and it's gonna all get straightened around. Our hope and role, I think, is just to try to make it happen in our lifetimes, at least.
Yes.
And I would say, if you're trying to get something done on Capitol Hill or not done on Capitol Hill, it's a lot easier to not have something happen. So the fact that we're asking that Congress does not change the definition in the 2018 Farm Bill of hemp, I think we're as a threshold issue, we're in a stronger place. But beyond that, we've gotten we've done a lot of meetings. We've been in pretty much every ag committee member office since last year, but we haven't gotten some of the new ones yet, but we're on our way. And I think we've gotten a pretty warm reception about it's probably too soon and without some solid justification. Not a commercial justification, but a scientific health-based justification. There's no reason to change it. So we are guardedly optimistic, but planning on working very hard this year to make sure that that happens, or that doesn't happen. I don't know that Congress will be successful in getting the Farm Bill reauthorized by the end of September, if at all in 2023. I mean, I think that's what everyone's planning on. The Farm Bill does have a history of getting extended, so we might see that, but we are assuming they're going to get it done on time, but we're ready if they don't.
Well, it sounds good, and I'm glad to hear that the definition of hemp, barring anything terrible happening, we're hoping that it stays the same, because it does allow, a good amount of latitude, and so that's been great. So Patty, I've really appreciated having you on. How can people get a hold of you?
Probably but best by email. ppower@bose, not the headphone people, but spelled just like it, BOSELAW.com.
And how about you, Jessica?
So I'm Jessica at WassermanDC.com.
All right, well, I want to thank y'all so much. I mean, we covered so much territory, even more than I was expecting, and so I hope that our listeners are now attuned to some new nuances in the law, having heard from the experts. So thank y'all very much.
Thanks,
Lisa.
Lisa. Bye, Patty.
Bye.